So, all right, the time is 1:01 p.m. I'm calling the June 6th, 2022 meeting of the Albemarle County Architecture Review Board to order. This meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with Ordinance Number 20A-16, an ordinance to ensure the continuity of government during the COVID-19 disaster. The quorum is present. Architectural Review Board members present electronically are Frank Hancock, Dave Vanderwerf, Frank Stoner, Tara Matsuno, and myself, Chris Henningsen. Opportunities for the public to access and participate in the electronic meeting are posted on the Albemarle County website at the Albemarle County calendar. The public has real-time audio-visual access to this meeting over Zoom and real-time audio access over telephone. Both is provided for in the lawfully posted meeting notice. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the county's website. This online meeting is a public record and subject to disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act. All speakers, when it is your turn to speak, please first state your name for the record. Everyone who is participating today, it is good practice to mute your microphone until it is your turn to speak. We'll just go to disclosures. Do any ARB members have anything to disclose?
No.
All right. Carolyn, are there any members of the public that want to make a comment about a project that is not on the agenda for review?
Not at this time, no.
All right, great. So there are no consent agenda items today or regular review items today. We just have one work session. The topic is the entrance corridor design guidelines addenda. And the presentation will be made by Margaret Malashevsky and Mariah Gleason. Are you ready, Margaret?
I'm going to share my screen. Are you able to see my slide? Great. Okay. Now let me make one more adjustment so I can see my notes. Okay. At our May 16th meeting, we presented a draft template design for the entrance quarter guidelines addenda, and there was a general consensus that the design looked good. So we took content from a portion of Dade's presentation on the Route 250 West corridor, and we put that into the new template format. And that was for the Afton Mountain segment, the westernmost segment of Route 250 West. So we hope you've all had a chance to review that content. I do have a few comments on the work for that segment. One, as we wrote the text for the general characteristics and the more specific features, it felt like the eastern end of the Afton segment should end at Plank Road, which is a bit west of the segment, and in the work that Dave did. Dave, I think your the point end point for your work was Brooksville Road or Route 796. But after driving the corridor again this weekend, I think the segment really should end at the Route 151 intersection, and obviously we can all discuss that. The other point I want to make is that in drafting this first segment, we eliminated the historic use patterns entry on the segment sheet. It just didn't seem necessary after completing the text on the overall corridor sheet. So if anybody's missing that, we can talk about that as well. But today we'd like to get your comments on this draft Afton segment, and then we'd like to talk about the process moving forward. Would you like to stop here and talk about the content before we move on to the next steps?
Sure. Does anybody have any comments about that so far?
I think, Margaret, your suggestion of ending it at 151 makes sense, and support that. And I would just like to give my compliments to Mariah and you and everybody on this. I think it's wonderful. And my main compliment is it's great. So.
Well, we used all your work, so.
Hardly, no. I think the pros, I was especially impressed by how delicately you called out the things that we shouldn't encourage folks to do again without being overly negative about them. So it's well done.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was really impressed with how it's turning out also.
Great, thank you.
All right, well, I guess if there's no further comments at this point, is there more presentation? I got
A little bit
One
more.
quick, I apologize. I was waiting for my home phone to stop ringing before it came off mute. It has now stopped. I would echo Dade and Chris's comments. I think the graphic design is great. I think it reads so well, so clear. My only question is diving into it. Do we think we need both page 2 and the detailed page 3 and 4? And then kind of as a follow-up to that, are we setting ourselves up for a lot of work? Because this is, if we're thinking about every segment of every corridor, and that might be your next discussion point, Margaret, but those are my two thoughts.
Yeah, I think those are good comments. I think what's going to happen as we do a few more of these, we're going to find that there are like characteristics and just chunks of text that will be applying to various pieces of other corridors. So, there's the next segment of 250 West may be very similar to a segment on 250 East or somewhere else. And so I think as we go along, it might actually, I think we have to get to a point, and then I think it will become less work. But we're certainly open to any suggestions that anyone has for streamlining. Why don't I run through the next couple? I just have a few more slides, and then maybe we can talk about all that together, if that works for y'all. So also at our last meeting, we looked at this list of corridors. These are the ones that survey work has been completed on. And then this list that's a little bit longer is the ones that we still need to cover. There was general agreement from board members that they could continue with this work. As we just heard, also there was suggestions maybe that there are some ways for streamlining. Frank, I think you had a suggestion about ARB members meeting with staff for a conversation before putting a whole lot of work into a presentation. That seemed like a great idea. Mariah has drafted an outline of how the work might flow from here. I think I just jumped ahead myself. Let me just see what I've got here. So yeah, so I think in terms of streamlining, an idea that we had was for possibly putting together a survey form where we would have check boxes and space for adding notes, but, and this is just this is not a complete version, but if board members are interested in this, we can continue to work on this. We could try to identify all the keywords and the descriptive terms that seem to be recurring for the various corridors, offer those as options with check boxes, get them on the form. So it might be easier to just identify the characteristics, and then we would take that and put it into the new template format. The other thing we'd like to know is if it would be, if there is mapping that we can provide you that would help the process, help streamline the process for you. So checkbox survey form and mapping are two things to consider.
Just to jump in on the mapping that we were thinking about when looking at the corridors, everybody had kind of highlighted the whole corridor, and then it was hard to tell where segments started and stopped all the time, just depending on the scale of the corridor. So we thought maybe using maps would be helpful just for having a more knowing exactly where you meant for the segment to end, and also kind of circling and highlighting buildings that are contributing towards the corridor, so that if we need to go back, if we decide to take pictures ourselves, that we have kind of some knowledge about where those buildings exist.
So then once we get that information together, we'll provide another shared folder to put it all in. The idea of meeting with staff, it's a great idea. I think it's a great thing we should do. Then we'll draft that text and put it into the template format and then present it like we are today to the Acton segment at an ARB meeting. In the meantime, we'll continue to work to transfer the survey work that's already been completed into the template format, and we'll we'll need to check in with individual members as we're doing that, but then we'll do our best to keep bringing those to the ARB meetings on a regular basis. So just questions for today. We've already got the comments on the Acton segment, other comments on the template format. I think we were short a couple of board members last week, so there weren't any. We didn't get comments from, I think, Dave and Frank Stoner on the template format generally. Thoughts on the survey form, thoughts on mapping needs, and then moving forward with unsurveyed corridors. So that is all that I've got for today. Can I pull up an earlier slide for discussion? How would you like to go from here?
Can we stay on this slide and talk to these points? Is that?
Absolutely. Just to add some nuance to the question, Frank Hancock, you asked, it's a good one that we struggled with. What is the purpose of having a segment and a corridor, kind of 2 pages to reference? And what we kind of thought through was that for these segments that don't have a lot of information in them already, and they're very rural, and there's just not a whole lot of definition there, then that would be an aspect, that would be a time where it'd be most appropriate to look at the corridor as speaking to the overall context, compatibility. And then for these smaller segments, you would reference this, the user would reference both the segment and the overall narrative that's written in the corridor. So essentially there would be 2 sheets to look at, but in the case where there's not a whole lot of context, at least you get with the corridor segment, where does this fit into the progression as you enter the city or are exiting the city? Is it compatible in those ways?
That's very helpful. Thank you for, just so I completely understand. So some of these segments might not have the following kind of deep dive. I think that's perfect.
Yeah, what we're kind of thinking is that there are some segments that are very distinct. Greenwood is very distinct in seeing the rolling cascade hills into this pastoral land that's up, there's both a up close and a far away, and that's distinct about the segment. There are some segments that just don't have a lot in them. So we could probably group them into one segment sheet. We would really be looking at to acknowledge them as a segment, but we would really be looking at the corridor for more information about what does compatible development look like.
Yeah, I think the whole segment idea is really good for a corridor like 250, where it changes in character from start to end so much. Like a corridor like 151 that Frank Stoner kind of outlined seems so small, wouldn't really need to have any segments. It would just be that 1-page corridor, would be all that you would need for that. So, I don't know that, I think 250 as an example might end up having more segments than most of the corridors, just because there's that kind of change in character over the course of it.
I think that's right. And I think that's where Mariah's design for these sheets will work really well. I think the corridors are all different, but I think we'll be able to use the format well and address all the differences.
Mariah, how are you guys thinking of once we have these corridor's done and the segment's done, do you imagine there being corridor-specific requirements or guidelines that get added or modifications of sort of the existing code to address the sort of unique characteristics within these different corridors? What are your thoughts?
When this study is done, I think it will become much more obvious which portions of the design guidelines overall really need to be updated, and it just gives us all the information that we'll need to be able to make those changes and to address and if we need to have specific, if we need to add specific guidelines for specific corridors, this will give us all the information we need to know how to do that.
Gotcha. If I understand correctly, Mariah, you're thinking you guys will do the mapping for the balance of the corridors and segments, just so it's consistent.
Right. Because there are certain softwares that we would be using and to kind of do that whole corridor and then the snapshots along the corridor. So it would just be easier to do it in-house.
Yeah.
And just to add one thing to what Margaret was saying, I think this is an in-between step on doing a larger facelift on the entrance corridors that would require more time and resources. But it's kind of that in-between step of acknowledging that Route 29 is not the same as Afton Mountain, without getting into a public process that really is more appropriate with community input. And because at that point you're looking at something that's a little more like designating character areas. And this is just more along the lines of acknowledging what historical attributes are along the way.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so after this study phase is done, when we get to the step of actually updating the actual design guidelines, that will be a more involved process, public process, board updates or changes to the design guidelines require not just A or B approval, but board of supervisors approval. So we'll be, as we're working through this, we'll be trying to scope out that phase as well.
Well, again, kudos on the format. I echo my cohorts in saying, yeah, I think I love the format. I think it's really nice.
And then I don't know if we're ready to move on to the survey form, but I think that's a good idea. It might really provide a good shorthand and a good way to expedite things. Be a good cue to folks to know what to look for, and also let folks know when they need to add something that's not been standardized before. And the mapping needs, I appreciate the request for clarity, and so I think I relied on the GIS for most of what I was doing. I don't know that we have to standardize the survey form, but if folks were able to get the GIS form and then mark up, just speculating, the start and end points and the landmarks, to Mariah's point. I don't know, would that work for the needs that you have for clarity, or is there another mechanism you propose?
Mariah, what do you think?
I think that we can always start there with the maps and then see how it goes if we need to pivot in some ways, if it's not working.
Yeah, I think Dave's right on with the survey and the mapping needs for me, especially having not done one of these yet. The little guidance on the format of what we're collecting would be helpful, but yeah.
I agree. And Dave, you make a great point. I think to expedite this before we had a schedule that took us, I don't know, out a year or so, that I think we could do a lot of this work and then, you know, have it come up on the agenda when it's in a much more completed form versus like the agenda item when the board member presents it is kind of at the beginning. I think this pushes us along further. So, and just another kudos. I was kind of looking at this thinking if I'm an applicant, and I think it's going to be very helpful. You know, I think it seems that you did a good job of writing it with the applicant in mind.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think even if just purely as a reference material, even if it goes beyond that or not, it's going to be enormously helpful. I think applicants and board members are going to be able to refer to each of these one pagers as kind of a point of reference for discussion, which, you know, a proposed project is not necessarily going to have to look like anything in particular on the sheet, but at least it's a kind of a frame of reference for compatibility or not.
Exactly.
I guess my one question, and this is partly answered, I think, by the characteristics to avoid section, but I guess my one thought in trying to collect this information is when we're photographing precedent buildings, like I could see a world where you want the precedent images to all reflect the things that are in conformance with the entrance corridor guidelines going forward. And I could see a world where you're photographing examples of things which are not in conformance. Or I can see one where you're sort of like purely providing significant structures within the corridor that, conforming or not, are just significant buildings on that segment. I guess is kind of the approach to just document the most significant structures, regardless of whether they're complying and not, and then documenting that there's certain things about them that we wouldn't want applicants to be repeating in the future. Is that kind of the general approach, or?
That's a great question, and it's one that we were kind of thinking about as well. I wonder if that's a great question for the ARB.
Because I guess I like the way that it's done here, but I wouldn't want somebody to get the impression that because it's been shown on this page, that they can use it as a precedent. I think it's good to document that it exists, but some way of indicate. I mean, and I appreciate that you've been trying to do that in the text as well.
Yeah, I think, yes, it's important to get the captions for those right, so it's clear what's being shown and why. And I think, I guess the images that we chose to include on this particular page, well, there aren't a whole lot to pick from for this segment, first of all. But I think that we would probably be trying to show the range of what's out there. We do have another sheet, you know, if we have more examples, if it's important to show more than what fits on this one page, we do have, you know, an option to do more. Yeah, I think we're just trying, we're wanting to illustrate the important buildings, and I guess you know, they're important, or the important sites, because they're what's establishing the character.
I thought on this sheet, at least, the captions did a pretty good job of outlining some things that appeared in those photos that you wouldn't want to do without, you know, kind of overplaying it. You know, I guess you don't want to single out a property owner for having a particularly heinous property that nobody should, you know, ever do that again.
I think the key words, the pre-ECDG.
Yeah.
That, you know, that and characteristics to avoid are the, you know, where you go to find that. But that's a great point, Tara.
So folks won't be able to substitute dilapidated farm equipment in lieu of street trees.
As meet the screening requirements.
That's right.
So in the process of going out also, like I think sort of representativeness and significant, like when we're going out routing, trying to find structures, we shouldn't also be snapping the worst examples and sticking them in the precedent necessarily, unless they're indicative of a broad, like the character of the corridor, I guess.
Yeah, I think we, when we're talking with applicants, we often do have applicants who come and say, well, this is happening out here, right next door. So why can't I do that? So it is good to have that information available. Says, well, that is, pre-entrance corridor, or there's some other issue going on there. And that's why that particular aspect of that development, we wouldn't want to emphasize or repeat. So yeah, I guess it's going to be a balance. And also a space, there are space limits. So.
I think it would be harder, I imagine, on corridors where there is a lot of recent development, that it was using this one size fits all structure. And maybe there are things that aren't compatible across the corridor, but that one was allowed to develop in that way. I don't know if that's true. I don't have an example, but it might not be such a bad thing to catalog some trend, to have 3 pictures to show a trend this was adopted or this was allowed in these years, but we're trying to go away from that. Just some acknowledgement that it might exist, but we don't really want to have it continue. And that way, in taking multiple pictures, you aren't singling out one person. You're kind of diluting the field a little more.
Seems like it'll come out in the paring down and editing phase too. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And just full confession, I think while I drove the corridor a good deal for most of the images, I just drove through Google Earth. And so for anybody that wants to be able to do it from their armchair, they've documented many of them pretty thoroughly.
Yeah.
So if you think about a corridor like 250 East, and the number of buildings along that corridor, Arrow's point lies, I guess, would we just show those that we think are the most compatible and the least compatible? Would we show all of them and assess them on some sort of scale? It's not an issue out here because there's just not that much, but I could see 250 East being challenging.
Yeah, I'm getting kind of I guess it sounds more like we would err on the side of collecting a lot on the front end, and then maybe it would be easier to have a conversation, like to Mariah's point of like, these are kind of all representative of a given thing that's going on. So let's pick an example from that to achieve a balance over the course of the images that we're able to include. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like a kind of when you start paring down and looking at images, you're able to see what is the most representative image and know that it's displayed on other buildings across the corridor. There might be significant structures that are historical in nature anyway. So I think it will flesh itself out. But there might be several corridors that go to a second sheet that's just images. But if you already have the images, that's the hardest part.
Yeah, for a corridor like 250 East, I mean, it seems like for internal discussion, it would be better to get more information than less. I think where there's a lot of buildings, it might be helpful to get most, if not all, the buildings that appear to be built, post entrance corridor guidelines, and then maybe a few examples of pre-corridor guideline buildings that, either are, significant for their goodness or badness. All right, so moving forward with the unsurveyed corridors. I like that I'm not listed on any of these corridors. That's my first comment. So in that regard, I really like.
Approved.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, and me not being included either. I wasn't sure if you all wanted to like reshuffle this whole map, or do you just not need someone to fill in those yellow chunks? Because I'm happy to volunteer. I didn't know if other folks who are already assigned had thoughts about their assignments either. If we wanted to have a broader conversation, or we just needed to figure out who did the yellow ones.
I'd be happy to have a broader reassignment. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. I remember I took over a few that are assigned to Frank Stoner, but I can't remember which ones, which I'll looking through my email. So I also think just a reassignment would be good.
There's 14 on this sheet, looks like.
Some are going to be more complicated than others. For example, 29 North and the John Warner Parkway. One's going to take a lot more work than the other.
Sure.
And some folks have already done some, right? Should we take that into account too?
Frank Stoner and Dade. Chris, you did one or two, didn't you?
Yeah. Yes, I definitely did 240, and
Or you already did all of yours. That's right.
on another one.
Yeah, so I think Fred made presentations on his, and Frank, you presented 151 and I think 240.
Yeah.
So it may just be translating those. I think Margaret's point, if somebody would like to take either south or north, I'm happy to do the remaining one of 29.
I think 29 is kind of an interesting one, so I'd like to do it. One of those. Let's see. Yeah, would you mind if I did north?
No, that would be fine, Tara. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'll make that change.
Is there anyone else who wants to drop one or switch one or something? Or should we just address the upcoming ones?
Happy to drop one of mine. You see something that appeals to you, Tara.
Stony Point Road. I don't know if I'm as familiar with these ones.
Rio Road West is an interesting one.
Rio West.
Got a lot of fair amount of new development, not very long.
Mhm.
So I can take the yellow ones, 64 and Route 631 and 20 South.
Thank you.
And then Frank, if you want to drop one of them, I can take one of those. And Chris, I could probably take one of those off your hands too, the yellow ones. If I'm doing 3, does that seems a little bit better if you've already done yours.
I feel like I've done 2,
I
but I
think,
can't remember the second one.
I think you might have taken some of the information and put it into a new format when that was already done. Is that possible? That might have been the second one.
Possibly, yeah.
And double check that.
I have not done any yet. You might want to take another one of Frank Stoner's. I think he's done at least 2. Or Dade.
Well, Frank, I was thinking I could take the, unless you really want it, the Rio, oh yeah, Rio Road West. From the,
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm fine with that.
oh wait, actually, I was looking at the airport.
Airport Road, that's fine.
Yeah, yeah, I thought that one would make more sense because I'm going up 29 North anyway. Maybe they can both be sort of tied in together.
Yeah, and 29 is worth several segments, so
Yeah.
no, I don't know if you need to take on.
Okay. So it looks like we've got a couple of things moving around, and the blank ones have been taken. So I will update the list and I'll send that back out to everybody. Is that good? Everybody happy with the assignments?
Oh yeah.
So Margaret, with the new format, is your expectation that we will go out, do the survey work, send the stuff to you or Mariah, it would go into the form and then we would review it? Or are we going through the same presentation kind of format that we had been using before?
Now, I think this will be streamlined because you won't have to put it into a PowerPoint presentation.
Okay.
We're going to try and get this checkbox survey form in a form that will be very usable for you. So you'll be using those forms, whatever mapping we were able to put together, and you'll be working with those 2 things plus the images, however you're taking them, either from Street View or if you're actually taking photos. Putting that information together, and then we'll sit down with you and talk through it, and then we'll be drafting the text to go into the one page that we looked at today. So we'll be skipping that PowerPoint presentation step, and we'll be presenting in the form like we did today for the Acton segment.
So can we do these anytime?
The sooner the better.
Yeah, okay.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah. I mean, so if you wanted to go do, if I wanted to go do all mine this week, you could do it.
I think that would be an awesome idea, unless you want to just, we're going to need a little bit of time to get that, the survey checkbox form to you.
Okay. Yeah, I can't get them done this week, but I was hyped.
I was all excited.
That sounded good, didn't it?
Friday by 5. Yeah.
Mariah, did you have anything to add about the process there?
No, I mean, I'm really glad that you all are liking the template. I am glad it seems to be dynamic and fitting the user groups, the different user groups, and it can be viable for a good lifetime. In terms of the process, we basically added in a step that we took away a step and added a step. You don't have to give a presentation, but there's still some value in distilling the information of what you saw. So we're basically starting still with a long list, and then with staff moving to a short list, and then staff will convert over to the draft template. The idea being you'll see completed sheets kind of along the way, and at the end we'll have, you know, the stack and book of an update. And it won't be one big document hitting everybody in the face at the end.
Great. Okay, I think we got what we need for today on this topic.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. So, other business. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the May 16th minutes?
So moved.
All right, can I get a second from anyone?
Second.
All right, we'll put it to a vote.
All right, Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Matsuno,
Aye.
Mr. Henningsen,
Aye.
Mr. Vanderwerf.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
All right, great, thank you. The next ARB meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, June 21st, 2022. This will be a virtual meeting. Is there anyone who will not be present for that? All right, so it seems like we will have a quorum. Does anyone have any other items they would like to discuss? All right, then the meeting is adjourned to the next meeting on Tuesday, June 21st. The time I have is 1:42 p.m. So enjoy your 2 weeks, and I'll expect to see everyone's full-on presentation in 2 weeks. So,
Thanks, everyone.
all right, bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
See ya.